You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.
You know they say that romance in gaming is rough. That the dice are the only thing that talks. But every time I sit down at the table and talk to that special NPC, I just get that feeling, that connection, that romance. So tonight, Sara and Rob are going to open the book. That book on romance. So sit close, light the fire, and listen well. And welcome to this edition of the Storyteller Conclave. After Dark.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 41 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best role-playing game that you can. Whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level, I am Sara.
I'm Rob.
Hi, Rob.
Hey. We had to give you guys a little bit of something for that one. So, yes, today we are going to talk about romance. But I kind of want to open with a little bit of a disclaimer because there's a lot of pieces that we're going to be going over tonight. But I kind of actually am pulling this disclaimer from one of the sites that I will be listing out in some links later. But we are going to be talking about the intellectual dance that is romance. We are not recommending, as our own opinions, that there should be any sexual relations that are included or deserving any kind of show in a game session. I particularly don't think anyone should ever have their own fantasies brought up at any tabletop game session.
It gets weird real quick.
So just straight up disclaimer, we are not going to be discussing that. That is not where the direction of this show is going to go.
This is about matters of the heart, not matters of the pants.
Right. And we're going to break it down in a couple of different ways to kind of it, because really there's two aspects to this. But just be clear, we're talking about the intellectual kind. We're talking about where it fades to black and horses are riding off into the sunset kind of a thing on a beach. You know, that's as far as it goes. So that being said, here we go. Romance.
Now this one's a little bit of your baby here. So,
it is. I've danced with this in a couple of my games. 7th Sea is chock full of it.
Oh, and, yeah.
There's a lot of game systems that have aspects of it, but most of it is the first part, and that's why I'm going to split this, and we're going to talk about the first part and get it out of the way, and that is by the dice. And that's anything that has a tangible effect in game terms. For instance, 7th Sea has Dangerous Beauty. Yep. And it literally has a written dialogue that about it that talks about how you are dangerously seductive. And that adds to your ability in anything where you're doing seduction rolls. That's a roll in 7th Sea.
Yep.
But it's also an effect that happens in game. You want to get by a guard, you can use seduction. You want to have something happen in your favor with a duke or a duchess or anyone. We can make seduction rolls. We've had players who literally have rolled those types of dice and completely changed the direction of a scene because they were able to manipulate somebody using seduction as a roll. And so that's really where those kind of things where you're, even in, I would say in, D&D 5th edition, using charm, in a seductive way is still a skill-based role. You're still acting. You're manipulating in a direction, and therefore it is dice hitting the table to affect, an action.
Like a deception check?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Or intimidation.
Yeah.
Not a strength-based intimidation.
But a definitely charisma, like I am way too hot for you and out of your league sort of intimidation.
Step off.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the whole, like, I'm looking at somebody across the bar and they start walking toward me. I roll intimidation so that guy literally looks back at his drink and ignores me because I am way over a 10 for him. You know, that kind of a thing, you know. And that's, again, by the dice. And I think that there's a place for that in almost every game system. And I think it can be role played very lightly and very comically in some ways, but also with a lot of the same vigor that we flourish our attacks and things like that. Because again, we're affecting the scene and we're saying what we're doing in a small term. And rolling some dice to see if it works.
We were talking earlier about my character using this very move all the time in your 7th game of walking up all seductively, showing a little skin, and getting in close enough to the unwitting guard to pull a gun on him, and then marveling at how that always works.
Yeah, it's an ambush attempt effectively that happens at point blank range. I totally believe. Again, it's by the dice.
Yeah.
Now.
But it's not romance.
It is not romance.
Yep.
It is definitely not romance, but that is often a distinction. So now we're going to step into the other side of that, and that is where it comes into the story. And this is where storytellers, and I'm going to stay from that aspect right now. We're not going to talk about player-to-player interaction because I think that is something to be discussed, and we'll kind of go over it, but we're going to keep away from that. The idea of bringing romance into your game is something that needs to be handled delicately.
Yeah.
I'm pulling a quote from Delphin Lynx, who said, regard to romance in RPGs is that in most cases people are at best mildly embarrassed by role-playing such scenarios. This isn't particularly surprising. It is likely the GM is someone they are, in reality, not at all romantically interested in. Further, such scenarios, even in cases of people who have gone through it in reality, tend to always develop a contrived, cliche, and uncomfortable feeling to them, which leads to the scenario being dropped.
Yeah, agreed.
It's true. Like, if your storyteller is a friend of yours, or a friend of a friend even, and he's seducing you through an NPC, it's awkward. Like, that situation can be very awkward depending on who's at your table.
Because there's always that. I mean, sure, you can get really into character, but at the end of the day, that's still Bob flirting with Jason.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, guys, you okay over there?
So I would say there's a couple questions to ask, and these come up a lot of times. And that is, first off, should I include it at all? And the real answer is, does it fit with the theme? Does it fit with the feel and design of the world? Does it fit with the system?
Yeah.
Like, ignore your players for just a minute and think about what kind of world you have.
Right.
I mean, if the world doesn't need necessarily seduction in it, it is not something that should pop up. Like, you don't need to include it. It's something that happens, but it's not something that is in the purview of the story.
Sure.
You know, action movies all the time try to throw in, like, sex and romance, but it sometimes feels really awkward in an action movie and completely unnecessary.
Completely unnecessary, especially when things are blowing up and then all of a sudden these two characters are like, I love you.
Exactly.
Like, you've known each other for 15 minutes.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And on the other hand, you get something like James Bond, which is set up a unbelievable number of scenarios where there's always going to be a Bond woman and he's always going to do something, that gets her going, or he's going to have to seduce her to get to a direction of something.
Yeah.
And it's just part of that theme and story. And again, both of us are feeling the same way, like, yeah, it's going to happen.
It's
like, there's nothing great about it, but
rote
it's part
in
of
form at this time.
Yeah, and it's sad to its own degree, and they've slowly moved away from that little by little. It is not nearly as bad or contrived as it used to be. It feels like the relationships have much more meaning to the story and come from a place that seem to have, and that's just better writing.
Yeah.
And you feel that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So should you include it, I think then steps into, will your players participate? Or is this going to make everybody just uncomfortable?
Right. And that's really the big clincher right there, because whether or not you think it fits or whether you should put it in as part of your story means utterly nothing if your players are not into it, And there's something you were also mentioning too earlier about the awkwardness of having your in-game relationships when you may have objections from people out of game.
Oh, yeah.
If your wife, is at the table.
Yeah.
Or maybe if she's not even at the table.
Yeah.
She just doesn't like the fact that your character has a girlfriend and that you're going to be role-playing a romantic attachment,
Yeah.
whether it's a fictional character or not.
Yeah. Like you wrote into the story with the GM that your character has a love interest who's, maybe working for the villainess, or the villain, and that's a love interest that the narrator now or storyteller now has to bring in. That's awkward as hell.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, like you've got other people at the table. That's just weird. So sometimes you just need to make sure you regardless, you have to communicate with your group and lay out the groundwork. Right. Now, if you have an established group who are comfortable with this, and you're, I'm going to use the term adult enough or mature enough to be able to move past that it is something corny or cliche, what are some reasons why would you have relationships with NPCs? Now, the first thing that we thought of when we talk about this is situations like in the case of 7th Sea where you have star-crossed. It's an actual defined flaw in the game, and that is that you constantly are falling in love or being in relationships that don't work out. Whether the person that you're with ends up being a scoundrel and doing something terrible in the story, or the person that you're with ends up getting captured, or any number of reasons, it relates to it as a flaw to you, a character flaw.
Isn't that what I had in the first half of your campaign?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And so it was a flaw.
Madeline and Helmut.
Yes. So,
yep.
But it's a flaw. And that is something that we think about is like anytime we have a relationship in all the stories we watch and everything that we read, it becomes a liability.
Yep. So let me give that example then.
Yeah.
So my character had that in the first part of his 7th Sea game. That kind of took place. We were like the characters were like 14 years old or something like that.
Yes. It was very young.
But Helmut was my character's young puppy love interest that sort of became a rival to me. We were that couple who constantly had professional differences, even if we did have romantic entanglements.
Yes.
And we fought tooth and nail on a business level.
Right. So when characters write things like that into their backgrounds, I think that does give the storyteller access to cause liability. Okay, for their player or for their character, cause a weight. Because again, there's a cost that's associated with that, but it's not an active cost in the game. It's a resource. And so I think that that's something that they are aware of. No different than if they said, hey, I'm a shop owner. Great. You have a shop you have to maintain. That shop could get robbed. That shop could have any number of things happen to it. But the benefits of that background give you something. So now we're going to be talking about actual in-game, in-story events.
Yep.
So if you link yourself to an NPC, whether it's through a hand fasting or some kind of an arrangement that's happening, that is to be something that is positive. And that, I think, should be reinforced.
Yeah.
It is going to give you a direct benefit, and I don't think it should have negative costs associated with it. Yeah, because you're playing into the story.
Technology brings up the true love merit again in World of Darkness, and I mean he put it in giant air quotes or giant quotes too, like because that's how I think it's universal. I pretty much think it's universal because like I did not know Technolich 20 years ago when I was first playing World of Darkness for real big for the first time there,
right?
And even then we would joke about the true love flaw.
Yeah.
It's like a 5-point merit that's supposed to give you a bank of willpower that you can, you have true love in your life, which is such a cool thing in this world of darkness. And, so you can tap into that for extra willpower when, you're trying to save your loved one or something like that. But no, instantly it just gives the storyteller someone to kidnap, someone
and I think
to
that's
abuse.
Wrong. Yeah, it's a merit and should be carried as a merit. And because of that, it should give you other benefits. And these are just some of the ones that I literally found very supportive online. And I will give you guys some of these. For instance, whenever you're connected with somebody, you're connected with a community attached to them, whether it's their family, whether it's the guilds they're involved with, because that connection carries weight.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, as much as and I don't hate my family in any way, but as much as anybody says like, oh, my dad called me, I have to go over and mow his lawn, you're going to go mow his lawn.
Yeah.
He's connected to you. He's family. It's just the way things go, right? You may begrudge it. And likewise, if my sister calls me and tells me that my brother-in-law needs me for something, I may not like him. I do. He's a really cool guy. But if I had a problem with him, I would still do it because of my sister.
And besides, you've been summoned for a side quest, and think of the XP.
Correct. So that's where you have to understand that the family and community definitely will give you a benefit, because a duke will still, even if that duke hates you and the things that you stand for, because you're betrothed to his daughter, he's going to bend. Like he's going to, because you're connected to him. He has no choice. You know, there's a piece to that. So that's why it's a merit when it happens in game in my eyes. If you're making an active move to it where you're not doing something subversive in the story. You're literally making a connection with something that is attached to the story on the side. Secondly, those NPCs have specialized knowledge and resource. They're not just a dumb object floating out there that doesn't do anything. Like, yeah, if you get connected and she's a librarian, great. Now you have access to a library. She can go look stuff up for you.
Yep.
You know, like I was saying, you might actually try and court this secretary and come to find out that the person that she's a secretary for is actually one of the main villains. And like, now you got some access there. Granted, she's going to be kind of concerned all the time with what she's doing, but she's a trusted ally of him, and now she's in love with you. Great. You know?
A surprise tool that will help us later.
Exactly. So that definitely should give you benefits.
We talked a bit about I think that sort of same concept when we were I want to say it was like a question we got asked, not even like an episode topic, but it was talking about NPC followers and kind of using those as off-screen resources where you could, you know, menial tasks that you don't want to define, you know, that you don't want to spend time at game with.
Yep.
You know, you want to be out doing the big, bold, dramatic adventure, but, you know, an NPC, and in this, could be very well someone's spouse or someone's betrothed girlfriend, you know, special, you know, someone, whatever.
Run your shop.
Yeah, exactly.
Tend to your farms. Deal with letters to your family.
Do research for you, you know, buy items while you're out, you know, things like that. I think it's a great idea.
Yes. So, continuing along that, they care about you.
Yes.
Like, you go and get captured or are in a, you know, maybe you're stuck in a situation, they're going to come find you.
This one I love.
This makes sense.
I absolutely love the idea of this, of just thinking like, you know, the whole group has been captured by the villain.
Sure.
And they're locked away in some stinky dungeon somewhere. And they're all planning their escape. And like every escape attempt just seems bleak and hopeless. And they're drawing the short straw as to who's going to sacrifice themselves.
Right,
you know,
right.
because one of them has to die to be able to get out of here or something like that. And then all of a sudden, like you hear a thud and an oof and a clatter of armor, and then down the hall comes creeping John's wife.
Yeah.
with a sword and some ill-fitting ramshackle armor going, John, are you in here?
Exactly.
And you're like, what? Betty, where the hell did you come from? She's like, well, I had to fight my way through some guards. It was scary, but I think these are the keys.
Yep, exactly.
Oh my God.
Exactly. You know, or if that's not the type of person it is, there's nothing to say that they wouldn't use all their resources to get maybe their dad, maybe the Duke, pull their favors.
Maybe they hire some mercenaries.
Exactly. So now you've got a group of mercenaries who show up like in black armor and bail you out, and they're like, how did you guys get here? It's a long story. We'll talk to the captain. You get out there to the captain of the ship and you realize that's the cousin of your wife.
Right.
You know, it's like, I spent a lot of money to get these guys on this boat.
Okay,
and
so
get
the
them
bad
here.
news is our Disneyland trip is off.
Exactly.
The good news is I got you out of prison.
Exactly. What happened to the shop? I sold everything. What happened to the farm? I had to sell that too. You know, what do we still have? I still have your favorite dog. Good enough. We'll make it through this.
Good enough.
You know, but that's the kind of things. And because of that, those people also will know you better. And this is where some aspects of role play can change. Yeah. And when I saw this idea that your connection, the person that you're connected with through this romantic means, knows you as well as you know it, almost better than you know yourself. They're like another storyteller that you can bounce things through. If you're having a crisis of faith, you know, write them a letter. they'll respond to you.
Yeah.
They'll encourage you. They'll give you, insight on things, and that right there one of the favorite things that my dad used to get, and it's totally role play as far as I'm concerned. He years ago, was signed up for this, it was like $5, in this little thing, and Jack Daniels would give you land that they had. And every couple months, he would get a letter from the curator of the land about his 1 square foot of property. And it would be stories like a cow died on it.
Oh, God.
And they had to, so they had meat that showed up there, but after they found out whose farmer it was, they had to deal with a whole bunch of stuff and then the cleanup efforts and everything. So they would have sent you the quarter that would have been yours. But unfortunately, they had to resod the area that your 1 foot of property, so it used up all the money, and actually you owe them, but they're going to wipe that off. But it was this beautiful story about what had happened
awesome.
Your land.
That's awesome.
And that kind of thing, when you can have those kind of connections with a PC, it changes the timbre of their play. If you write them a letter and hand it to them and say, a courier delivered this to your to the address that wherever you guys have been staying, and they open up the letter and it's a letter from their loved one, and it talks about home and it talks about things that are going on and maybe a little bit of plot information that they had asked about, and then leaves it open for them to write back.
Yeah,
it's those kinds of things that make those scenarios feel real.
That's kind of like what I was doing with the Mages Guild NPCs in my own game. Where I had one of my characters expressed some romantic interest in an NPC, and so I scrabbled together a little love triangle where there was another character vying for his attention, but then there was another character vying for her attention, and so. It kind of got things a little mixed up, and it wasn't ever a major plot or anything like that. It's not a huge thing that consumes a lot of time at the table, but it does make those NPCs seem a lot more alive when, one is, in a scene, you've got one crying in the corner of the basement.
Exactly.
With a smashed jewelry box in front of her going, she didn't like the gift,
right. And now the players who got all that together are like, oh my God,
exactly.
Really?
And now you've got one character who's like, oh, she smashed my jewelry box, I hate her. And then another character who's like, I'm going to get her a glass of wine. She clearly needs it. We'll have a chat, but it deepens even that little interaction deepens the bonds with those NPCs and gets things a lot more involved. And I think it's really great. Like you said, that letter from home, man, if you did that in one of our games, man, I would just I would die. I wouldn't even know what to do. I would just I would treasure that letter forever.
Yeah. And again, it adds a level of depth without it being romantic to a degree.
Right.
We
haven't had to involve sex, haven't had to have deep involved, relationship. It's just a letter.
And expanding on that, like you were saying, where you have true love in some stories as a merit, that does give you something to live for.
Yeah.
It does push you. So when you have scenarios where your characters are down, and they get things like inspiration, it gives them something to be inspired by. So your bard character at the last minute who's going to throw something, has no idea what to inspire by, can literally look at them and say, do this for Olivia.
Yeah.
Do this for your daughter. And suddenly, now that person has inspiration and a reason to be inspired and to move through the scene. And as a storyteller, you're excited for that. You're wanting to watch that scene progress in that direction. If you have a player like in 7C who, wants to spend a drama die to ignore something that just had them, and granted, taking the wounds from it, but they want to ignore the other effects from it. If they throw the love card at me that they're doing this because they're surviving to find their beloved, or exactly that's where I'm totally going to accept that. I'm going to be like, you damn right. Yes. Give me the drama die. Yes. Right. Without a doubt, you literally spat blood back at them. Nice try again.
We have you outnumbered 4-1. That doesn't seem fair. Go get some friends.
Exactly. Those kinds of things are those moments. And that's where you throw those moments of romance into the story.
Technolich adds in, of course, death cannot stop true love. Of course it can't. All it can do is delay it for a little bit.
That's right. And that's the beauty of what romance can do in your stories. So,
but please, and I'm begging all of you in explicit terms, we're not even going to dance around it, storytellers, if someone has a true loved one like that, let them have it.
Yeah.
Please don't punish them for it.
Don't punish them for a merit. Don't punish them for a merit. Now, how do you do it? This is where things start to get into place. So number one,
let's talk turkey.
Tell your players you're doing it. Don't bring it in. You have to be upfront. Do not say that it's going to be an exploitable weakness, that you're not going to do that. Like literally just put it on the table that, hey, if you're going to have a relationship with one of the NPCs, and we've already established that, great. It's going to be a positive thing. It's going to be challenging enough to get into that situation, and I'm not going to be involving dice. This is pure role play. What you do with them as far as bartering or anything like that, sure. But if you're going to role play a romance with them and move in that direction and buy gifts or, take them on dates or whatever like that to have those scenarios, it's going to be role play and it's going to become a benefit because you're investing the time to make that happen. I am not going to pull that rug out from underneath you. Things will happen that will be affecting them. If the war comes through the town, but I'm not going to murder their character. You're going to find them dirty from the fires and helping people out and being supportive, but they're not going to be dead because you don't do that to a supporting actor.
Right. Well, that and just the idea that they could be in danger should be enough of a driving force if if the romantic bond is strong enough,
Exactly.
Like, oh God, we have to go back and save that village. It's in the path of the war.
Correct. And it shouldn't matter. The player shouldn't immediately go like, well, do they have powers? No, they're a person. Granted, there are some worlds where they're going to be different.
Sure.
Depends on the game setting, but they're going to be a mediocre NPC as far as all terms and conditions are. They're not going to suddenly sprout wings and become a goddess at any point in the game. You're not going to pull them directly into plot.
Why the hell am I even dating her then?
I know. Well, that again, if you're doing it for that reason, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. So this is where you then can step into how do you make an NPC work? And this is where you can kind of sprinkle hooks out there so that each one of your NPCs that have the possibility have one of these things, or sometimes multiple. They could just be single. That's it. Simple as that. Like that's the easiest way to set up a romantic hook. It just
eligible
happens.
bachelor/bachelorette.
Right. They could be some well-defined social group. Maybe those are expected to marry within that group, unless it's like a modernistic setting where it's whoever can get it. But I mean, if your character's a noble and that character's a noble and you're both unwed, that kind of puts you guys in a certain bracket. Likewise, you're a merchant. That person's part of a different merchant class. It would be a wealthy thing for both families to get together. Another good reason for it. So those kind of situations definitely set themselves into those types of events. Potentially attractive. It doesn't mean that they're overpoweringly, attractive or something else, but it could be a personality quirk that is attractive.
Sure.
That directs the character to them. Maybe your character is very interested in jewelry and gems, and this person is a gem crafter. And they specialize in making rings and necklaces, and all of their stuff, all their adornments are gorgeous all the time.
You're interested in arcane secrets? They open portals to oblivion.
That could be a thing. They could be really good at some thing that happens in life. Maybe they're socially adept. Maybe they're really strong. Maybe they're very intelligent. Maybe they're emotionally intelligent, which is sometimes kind of hard to find in the world.
Girls only like guys that got skills.
Yep.
Nunchuck skills, sword skills, bow staff skills.
Yeah. I'm hearing you. They also chick stick scars. Go figure.
Right.
But maybe they're just really well connected. And that is something that attracts your character. Like, hey, I'm a bard. You know everybody in town. This sounds like a really great way for me as a musician to suddenly, now have connections everywhere, and those kind of things. So as you step through these, think about other areas. Like, for instance, they could be really bad at something, like really bad at it. Like maybe they're bad at social cues or they are frail. And those kind of things can definitely lead to your character being endeared to them and taking care of them. A lot of times people will draw themselves to people who need support. Your character's a caregiver character. You see them as somebody who needs care, and that becomes a relationship that grows from there. A lot of time it is an injured person that in stories that gets connected to the person who's giving them care.
Right, but everybody loves that sort of lovable idiot, though.
That's true.
Like it's sort of adorkable that they trip over their own feet. Oh, he's so cute.
Yeah, and then there's always the people who are just terrible at something.
Yeah,
and you just feel for them. And now you're connected with them, and you end up having a relationship. Now, again, that relationship spectrum is quite large. It doesn't immediately have to go from 0 to getting it on. And having 5 kids.
Oh, yeah.
So keep in mind that romance is a spectrum. It is not just a beginning and an instant end, nor does it have to grow. So when you're working with your players, understand that romance can be fleeting. It can be quick. It can be just something that happens town to town. It can also be something that happens to your characters where people are drawn to them because of their charisma, their abilities. I mean, that's something that can happen, and then it's up to them whether or not they adapt to that and move into those pieces. Technolich
was actually just bringing that up in the live chat. He says character has an excellent reputation as an adventurer. They could have the equivalent of groupies.
Exactly, and that happens a lot, especially in cases where it's not necessarily even groupies, just rich people are going to draw people who want to be close to the rich.
Yes.
In a lot of games.
Yes.
You have people who are present at scenarios and are magnanimous. Those people are going to draw people as well. No different that you're going to have, if you've got a courtesan who is strikingly beautiful, she's going to have admirers who are going to throw roses at her and be interested in her. And a few of those might actually be decently well-suited suitors that now that person has to kind of decide whether or not they're going to deal with that. And that would be true in a situation regardless of the setting, whether or not you're going to include or not include romance. It's just a matter of how far do you go with that. If you include romance, obviously you now have avenues for additional side plots. But if you don't, there's no question that person can be like, I don't accept suitors because you can't afford me. Those kind of moments.
Yep.
And that the groupies are literally just that. Like, yeah, you just did an amazing performance, and there's like 9, maidens outside the window of the inn, all swooning and passing out. That's not romance. That's an after effect.
Yeah.
You wake up in the morning and there's little handkerchiefs laying across every surface around your inn room, whether it's the windowsill or the front thing, like they're shoved underneath the prim. Like you can't even open the door fully kind of a thing.
Medieval version of taking your bra off and throwing it at a rock star.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So those kinds of things are things that can happen prior to it being actively romantic in your campaign. The moment you start having interactions between PCs and NPCs that go beyond just a simple interaction is when romance comes into it and when discussions need to be definitely made.
Sure.
And it should be made well before that interaction occurs.
And I mean, the golden rule for everything, of course, is always communication.
Completely. Like, we'll never stop saying that because you just need to do it. Like, if you're not communicating with your players about these types of things, you're creating a disservice for yourself as a storyteller.
Yeah.
So
I'm actually reminded of this is my obligatory Critical Role reference for the thing, and everybody. They're celebrities now. We can't really argue with that.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people look up to that as like kind of a sort of picturesque group. But when romance started budding in their group in the first campaign, like it was kind of alarming to them in that like. I think it was Vaxeldon, and he like kisses. Spoilers for season 1. Like kisses Keyleth, and then all of a sudden it's like. Holy crap, like, did that just happen? Like, you can do that? That can be part of the game? Romance can be part of the game? What? But, out of game, though, they all checked with each other. Like, these weren't – this was Liam O'Brien and Marisha Ray. Ray, who's married to Matt Mercer.
Which – let's pause for a second here on just that action alone.
Right.
Now, I don't know because I don't watch the side things.
Sure.
Did they bring it up in their sideline discussions about how things happen?
Well, that's what I was just going to get into.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Is that out of game, that there was a immediate discussion that took place of like, was that cool?
Okay.
You know, or does that need to be that was a scene
Once
that
and done.
happened, and then know we'll deal with it, but we'll walk away from it.
Right,
in
right,
game,
right.
You know, and everybody was like, no, that's cool. Like that's a valid story to tell, and as long as we're all comfortable with it. And then as the season progressed and stuff like that, like another romance came up. Vexalia and Percy got together.
Sure.
There was another romance, but again, more talking of like, is this cool? Because like Vexalia was played by Laura Bailey, married to Travis Willingham.
Right.
Sitting at the same table,
Right.
watching her, and they got, I'd say more graphic. Graphic is not really the word because it was never R-rated necessarily, but
Sure.
there was definitely some PG-13 things that happened.
Which, I mean, they're a show. I'm just going to say that right now.
Right. There was situations that unfolded that were never on screen, but heavily implied what was going on.
Right.
But
And I think there's a certain aspect of that can be played out.
But again, this was all with open communication.
Right.
Everybody was like, you have full right to pull the plug if you're ever uncomfortable with this.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turned out, everybody was a big fan of everybody's on paper relationships, and those relationships stayed on paper, never left the paper.
Right. And I think that as a group plays together longer, they get comfortable with who each other are and where those boundaries can set and how comfortable they are with them. I think that like no different our group that we game with, we have a pretty set group, a couple people interchange in and out every once in a while, not quite unlike anything else we've ever seen in some of these larger groups. But we're comfortable with each other to a point where, like, I can include a level of romance in the game that is very fleeting and very quick, but we all know that probably it's for the best that I don't have direct character-to-character and NPC-to-character reactions. That anything that's there are going to be very light and very simple and not include anything that it has direct interaction.
Yep.
Because there are concerns between people at the table. And I'm perfectly fine with that.
Yeah.
It's been just understood that that's the way it is. So, but that's what you need to discuss with that's what you need to get through with everybody else, and define with them so that there's never a point where someone is too uncomfortable. You don't push past that boundary.
Right. And the other thing too that I wanted to bring up with that was like the fade to black. If it ever does end up going that direction where two characters are going to, shall we say, retire for the evening, you just fade the scene to black.
Yeah.
You don't need to go into detail of what is going on in that bedroom. You just say, okay, you two head upstairs, and you hear a giggle as as you reach the top, and that's it. Like literally it. Everything else can be completely, implied as to what happened up there. You know what happened up there.
Exactly. And like there was an instance, and I don't consider this romance, kind of this groupie kind of thing.
Sure.
One of the characters, Pablo, is rich. He's good looking, and is a swordsman. And so as the campaign was going, women were effectively throwing themselves at him at different points in time. And I never once role-played any of those scenarios beyond like, at this inn they recognize you, the bath is ready for you. We'll make sure that, you have the towels and things you need. And he goes to enter the bath, and there are two ladies and a gentleman waiting for him, prepared to handle the bath, and the door closes.
Yep.
And that was it. I literally left it at that. I
Yep.
didn't go into any detail, and then the next morning, how was your bath? It was lovely, quite relaxing. And that was it. Like, it was left at that, but it was left with a door closed.
Molly Mock Tea Leaf from the second season here of Critical Role. There's a great scene where they went to they got in their first big payoff on a job, and they went to like the ritzy hotel in the rich side of town, and there was essentially room service that they could order. There was staff there to tend to whatever needs they needed, and so Molly Mock, the flagrantly bisexual tiefling in their group, walked up to them and ordered some room service. He says, "Can I have a plate of fruit and a masseur?" To come to my room.
Right.
And she's like, "Well, do you have any preferences?" And he's like, "Your best hands, your best conversation surprised me."
Right.
And so a very attractive man and a very attractive woman with some massage oil and a plate of fruit came to his door, and he was just like, hey,
exactly.
both of you, come on in,
Yes.
And then again, that scene didn't
And right there.
There was an aftermath where he walked in draped only in a
Like a toga.
a tapestry, essentially wearing it like a toga, saying
Right.
"I am your god, long may I reign,"
Yeah.
which became one of his famous lines, and
Right.
offering what was left of the fruit plate
Right,
to them.
right.
Everybody knew what happened in there,
Exactly.
But,
But again,
it was a great little skip, and the fact that it was not told and left to the imagination,
Right.
filled in so many more blanks for them than actually telling it would.
Correct.
But
But then to expand on that, if you're going to offer romance into that story, now you would have, is there a connection to those individuals after the fact? Does he hire them on as a hireling so that they stick around and now have become kind of a concubine? At that point, now there's character story that now if we go back to old D&D standards, now you have followers.
Yeah.
And those did have value to you.
There's places you can go with it, right?
So I always want to go with the couple of rules I'm going to say. Number one, decide whether or not it's good for the game setting. Does it fit your world? Does it fit your setting? Does it make sense to your plot and story to add this in? If you're doing an open world where lots of things are changing, like maybe really the plot isn't wrapped around a specific individual, they're all in Waterdeep. And it's things that are happening in Waterdeep. Sure, romances make sense in something like that. Because again, it's very open, things are going to change, you're going to have little plot interactions, but really they're not leaving Waterdeep.
And exactly. And if you've got a solid foundation like that, then you've got time to put down roots, and that's the big thing, But if you're globetrotting across the countryside and the entire Sword Coast is your playpen, maybe maybe you've got someone in Waterdeep to come home to every so and then.
Exactly.
Maybe they can take care of your holdings. Maybe that's a sort of thing. Or maybe there's something going on where you've got someone in Waterdeep and someone in Neverwinter.
Exactly.
And
that's and I think that adds a different layer to the story. So if you feel that maybe one of your characters really is interested in doing this, that he's just like, hey, this character is kind of a skip who goes and picks up women at every single port of call.
Cad, that's the word I was
there
thinking.
you go.
Yes,
a cad. That is perfect. That there's nothing to says that, your roving Don, doesn't do this and just has a lot of women who he's connected with. Your Don Juan type character, as long as everybody else is comfortable with it and you can establish at what level you're going to accept the romance, then I think there's no problem with that.
And you can even add in little plots there too, where like maybe a villain finds out about one and kidnaps her, and then the other one is like, who's she?
Exactly. But again, I would still be wary of that because, again, you're moving into a liability phase. And you never want your players to feel like they're creating liabilities unless it is a liability on paper.
Fair enough. But if they're being a cad about it, like
I think it's a liability at that point.
Yeah, you've already set the tone that this is a dirty secret they don't want exposed rather than a true love that they will come home to.
I think Don Juan was very open about it, and so it wouldn't have been in his case. It may have caused liabilities on the side, but not with them directly.
It reminds me of a great quote from one of my favorite movies, The Long Kiss Goodnight. Samuel L. Jackson says, "I make it my policy always to be frank and earnest with women. On the East Coast, I'm frank, and on the West Coast, I'm earnest."
Well, there you go. So he knows his problems. So, in short, I think romance is something that can be brought into game. It can be scaled very well, but I think the biggest thing you can do is be open and honest about it. And when things do come up, that you're very clear with your players, and you're very clear with the definitions of how far you're willing to go. And don't go too far. I mean, there's a time and a place for that, and that's not at the table with 6 other friends sitting around that you've known for 20 years.
Exactly.
So, all right. Did I exhaust that to death?
Well, I don't know if we exhausted it.
I will throw some links out there because I did find some amazing articles on this that I hope, if you're thinking about doing this, read these articles. They're very, very good. Wonderful people wrote some wonderful stuff, but I would love to get into some questions.
The great news is we're doing great on time, so we got plenty of time for questions.
Let's do this.
You wanna grab the first one, or you want me to?
Go ahead.
All right, so let's just start right off at the top of the list here.
Sure.
Technolich. So Technolich is asking something that I've strived to include in my plots because it's a personal interest, is the inclusion of non-heteronormative romantic bonds between characters. And by this he means NPCs. You'd never force romantic interactions on a PC, which is good.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Any tips on how to do that and not ham-fist it, unless that's what you're into?
I think ham-fisting any kind of description isn't important unless it's important to plot.
Yeah.
So, whether or not like like in your story you had we went to the blacksmith and it was like the two maidens or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was literally a couple, two ladies. One was the smith and the other one ran the shop. And there was nothing ham-fisted about it. It was just the scenario that was there.
The Nord hit on the shopkeeper. She said, "Sorry, that's my wife back there hammering out your full plate." And he went, "Oh, my bad."
Yeah, you're lucky, and that was it.
And that was it.
Right. It just walked away at that point.
So my advice to you, as a proud member of the LGBT community myself, do it the way you would do any other relationship. Like if you don't ham-fist heteronormative relationships,
right.
You don't have to ham-fist, non-heteronormative relationships.
Right.
You can just literally have two women or two guys or, any
Whatever.
other, gender combinations.
Transverse in there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Likewise, if there's a important point to pull out, for instance, you see the princess getting it on with quote-unquote her sister, as you've discovered in plot, while she's engaged to a prince. That's a plot point.
Right. Like, that's not her sister. That's her girlfriend.
Right. And now that's part of plot. Like,
Yeah.
who is she really? What is really going on there?
But the alarming thing there should not be that she's kissing another woman.
Correct.
It should be that she's kissing someone else, regardless of gender, when she's betrothed to the prince.
Exactly. And I think that's where things can get a little feel ham-fisted, but really you're trying to expose plot. And or like there was a great scene in a movie, and I think it was Legally Blonde did it, where she's interrogating the witness. So she asks the witness, because he's apparently been getting it on with like the one woman who's the main lead in it. He's like,
Right.
"Oh yeah, we do it all the time. We're constant lovers." He's like, "So who's Edward?" He's just somebody." And the guy in the back goes, "I'm just somebody," and gets up and storms out. He goes, "No, baby, you're my love. My love. I'm so sorry." And like you realize he's gay. And that he's had that partner for a very long time. So there's clearly he doesn't have a relationship with her.
Right,
That's clearly
right.
a lie. And so it's a setup, but it's necessary to show
That her alibi was false.
that his alibi and her alibi were screwed,
Yeah.
in that scenario. So I think that is a ham-fisted way of doing it, but it's for plot. You're driving it for a plot reason.
And again, the important thing wasn't the
No.
the
The
gay
relationship.
relationship.
No.
It was the fact that it busted their alibi.
Exactly.
And plot moved on.
Exactly. All right. I think we got that one.
All right.
Sam, I've never thought about romance coming up in stories at all. So my main question is, how do you incorporate opportunities for it? Or romance in general, I guess. This could very well be answered in the show, and it kind of was. So when you're thinking of including romance in a story, think about some of those things that I was telling you, like, is the person single? Or do they have some kind of an attraction to the players? And I wouldn't say expose it directly to a player, but if you see a player who is interested in an NPC, give them those avenues. Show them through subtle ways that those are things that might be interested to them. And at that point, you've exposed no different than a plot or a quest that's available. Like if, there's a bunch of orphans sitting outside of a building that shows a sign that says, that's been boarded up, and they're all sad and lonely. Obviously something's going on there, and you might go look at that plot and see what's going on with those kids. If you see a shopkeep who's struggling in her shop, things don't look really well done, and some of her stuff that's put out really isn't that great a quality, and her hands are all chapped and everything, and you're like, you're buying stuff from her, and you're like, "Hey, what's going on?" She's like, "Well, my husband died a year ago, and I've been doing my best with what's left of his stock, and I'm not great at making things, but I'm really good at selling, and I've always been able to keep things up, but I really don't want this shop to go away. It's my life." You have a hook. There you go.
Yeah.
The hook is there. Can it go from that point? Sure, it can go from that point.
Yeah.
But it's no different than any other plot hook. It's just a matter of going through the list. And if you need help, again, I'm going to put the list out there that this guy put up, which I thought was brilliant. He literally also has an extended list that I have a link for that literally just gives you NPCs with romantic hooks. And I thought it was brilliant, and it's wonderful. So I will put that up for you, Sam. I think it's a great way to step into something like this if you're interested in doing it. You got anything you want to add to that one?
Not really, no.
Okay.
The only thing I think I might be able to add is know your table. And so, you don't want to drop romantic plot hooks in front of someone that you know is just not going to be interested in a romantic plot.
Right.
It's
the discussion.
So, yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think I really had a discussion with the particular player that I am throwing romantic hooks at.
Right.
There was no explicit hey, this is going to happen,
right.
blah, blah, blah. But I know the player well enough, and we've been friends for such a long time that I know that discussion doesn't necessarily need to take place, and I can drop a couple hooks,
right?
And she's bid on them.
And that's the thing is that you also have to listen to your players and listen to how they react to situations.
Exactly.
And then you can set those for it. If you've got a player who's literally been hitting on every bar maiden at every bar, there's a good chance that they're probably going to step into something.
They're fishing for a hook there.
Correct. Correct.
On the other hand, though, newer players at your table, you may want to have that explicit discussion with, or, outright just not drop them hooks.
Yeah. I would say anyone new, stay away from it.
Yeah.
Because that's a direction you do not want to step into. And I would say as first-time game masters, don't step into romance. It's one of the hardest areas to step into. It's the easiest thing to stumble into.
It is the easiest thing to bleed into out-of-character drama.
So easy.
So easy.
So easy.
Yeah. So I would avoid if you're new to it.
If it's new, take your time.
Until you get to know your table and you can guarantee a little maturity and
you've got your curated group. Yeah. Never do it for a one shot. Never ever do it for one shot.
Well, it's too slow to be in one shot.
All right, grab another one.
All right, so the Mad Elf would like to ask us, how do you work with in-game character relationships, married characters or characters in relationships with NPCs?
First off, character-to-character relationships, I think, is challenging. And it really takes a lot of curation between them. That is not something for the storyteller really to work with at all. But I think between characters to NPCs, like we had talked about, there's all kinds of benefits that can come out of that unless it's meant to be a liability and it's established well ahead of time that it's going to be a liability.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference there.
I think I would only allow married characters if they're married in real life.
Or in their own relationship.
Right.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed. Yeah. I don't like the idea of the two players who are not connected in a relationship outside of game doing stuff inside of game unless there's a crap ton of discussion about it.
Yes.
I mean, I've been at tables where that's happened, where it's just like, oh yeah, we constantly have relationships between our characters, but it doesn't, like, I'm married to him and he's married, to this other guy.
Right.
And that's just the way it goes. It's like, oh, all right, well, as long as you guys are okay with it, I'm perfectly fine. But the moment that it gets weird, out.
Right. Right.
So.
All right, so Knox in the Box would like to ask, how do you deal with the creepy Pepe Le Pew PC whose romantic overtures are creating actual discomfort in the group when they argue it's just meant to inspire RP discomfort? Or is that just how the character is? Well, first off, we generally game in worlds where unrealistic things can happen, like consequences. Powerful adventures and powerful magic items and stuff like that are a thing that are existing in a lot of our worlds.
Right.
So, frankly, whereas in the real world, a lot of times the Pepe Le Pew guy gets away with it because they're surrounded by enablers and whatnot, which they utterly should not be, and it's a sad, sad situation. Also, Vorpal swords don't exist in our real world, but they do in D&D.
They do.
So, if your creepy Pepe Le Pew character starts, making everybody at the table uncomfortable by getting all up in the barmaid's business, there's nothing saying that there isn't a 10th level adventurer kitted out with magic items who's going to stand up and defend her honor.
Nor is it any different than you talking to that player outside a game and saying, hey, you stab every NPC you show up at, or try to rob every PC that comes up. The NPC comes up, I'm pickpocketing them. Why do you do this? Why do you pickpocket every person? Well, I'm a thief. That's what I do. No, you're a kleptomaniac is what you are.
Right.
And none of the other players like a kleptomaniac. So they're asking for me to literally drop you as a player or kill your character.
Yes.
I see no different there. You are disrupting the flow of the game and making it uncomfortable for everybody else to game. That puts you right out of the game as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I don't need that at my table. I'm struggling enough to make sure that this game is continuing and everybody's enjoying themselves. If you're actively being an ass at my table, I will actively tell you to stop doing it. Mm-hmm. So that's the way I take it. Like, I don't like people, if other people find that like you have a fop character who's foppish and open, there's a light way to play that and there's a heavy-handed way to play that. And if people are uncomfortable, you have to be willing to dial back. If you're not willing to dial back, maybe it's time for a different character.
Yeah.
Maybe it's time to step away.
Character, or maybe it's time for a different game.
Exactly. I actually like this next question from Overwatch. If you're ready, move on.
Oh, as opposed to all the other Overwatch questions you didn't like?
No, I meant on the table for whatever. Do you feel the main NPC could pass a Voight-Kampff test? Now, if you're not familiar with that term...
Yeah, I had to have this one explained to me.
If you've seen Blade Runner, it's the machine that they're using to test whether or not you're basically human or not. What about supporting rosters, merchants, street urchins, and the like? Do you think the players would recognize this? And I think my take on his question is, are they real? Mm-hmm. Do you feel that your characters are real? Meaning, if you were to ask that NPC a challenging question that's personal and designed to drive emotion, would they have an appropriate emotional response? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You tell them that imagine you're talking. World changes. The merchant's sitting in a white room at a chair in front of a god, and he goes, "You're walking across the desert. There's a turtle in front of you. He's laying on his back. The sun's beating in his chest. If you don't flip him over, he's going to die." Like, how do they react to that? Like, if they're a machine, they'll just be like, "I flip it over." Mm-hmm. No emotion, no feeling. That's just what they're going to do. And I think in that regard, we're saying, are these NPCs real enough to be like, "Oh my God, that's horrific," or I can't find myself in there. Yeah, God damn it, the turtle reference.
The turtle reference. You just gave.
I did it.
Just gave them everything they wanted.
Jesus,
everything they wanted.
How does
and
this happen?
The chat goes wild.
How does this happen? We don't even
get an
try.
air horn.
It's true. It's true. So their question really is, would they have an appropriate response? Would they have an emotional response? Would they feel real? And I think that does kind of lend to the romance aspect. If a rich, a wealthy, well-to-do noble comes wandering into a nice merchant's home who has daughters, he may try and hook one of them up with him in some way, because that's a huge thing. Like, that's something that could possibly happen. And you look at video games, that does not happen. Like, if my character walks in and I have literally 1 million credits and my reputation is through the roof, yeah, I might get a little better prices out of him, but he ain't hitting on me and telling me his daughter's hot. Yeah. That's literally the failure of those systems, and that. But in reality, that probably would happen. Like, I'm sorry, you have some rich dude come busting in your house, comes and busting your area, you might swoon a little bit, and that's what we're talking about. So I think you can have your players recognize those kind of moments and see what it means to them.
I think too, though, like, I don't know how I want to phrase this, but basically, I think you need to kind of forgive yourself for not having NPCs with that level of depth. Because
I agree.
It takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of So I think there's a thing, and I don't know the technical terms for it, so I apologize for that. But it's where you can only quote unquote know 150 people in life.
Yes.
Like, and actually know their name and care about them. Like, we as human beings only have the capability of caring about 150 people or so. After that, people start to fall off. People start to you just don't register their names. You just don't register emotional responses for them. And if someone does come into that circle, you almost have to start omitting people.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just something about how our brains work.
Yep.
It's
totally.
it's not a social commentary. It's literally just our brain's capacity to process people.
Right.
And so I think the same thing kind of happens as storytellers with your NPCs.
100% I agree.
Your core NPCs, your main people in town, the people that they work with, the important nobles or important mages, guild members or whatever, those are all going to be you're going to care about their emotional responses to things.
Yes.
And you're going to give thought to what their responses might be, what their motivations are, what their passions are, their prejudices are, and stuff like that. And so those are the characters that will pass your Voight-Kampff test.
Yep.
But rando shopkeeper that you just asked me what his name was, and I looked down on a random list that I had scrolled down and said, this is Luke.
Yeah.
And Luke says, hi, were you looking to buy a saddle today?
Right.
Oh, and I put Sneezy next to him because I do the Seven Dwarves thing.
Yep.
And so he sneezes and says, I must be allergic to the poppies.
Yep. All right.
I don't care about him.
I agree. And unfortunately, we're getting our 1 minute timer, so we got to wrap this up.
Yep. All right. So you can find us on Twitter at @ST_conclave. On Instagram, also at @ST_conclave. And on Discord, you can find the link anywhere on our Twitter feed and in the description of every podcast episode.
We'd also like to thank our Patreon members, Knox and Sam, especially. Thank you so much.
Big shout
ever
out.
so much.
We love you.
We love all of our Patreon listeners, every single one of them. Tonight's music you're hearing right now is White Feathers of a Little Angel by, and I kid you not, it's Ish10 Yao 1RO. That's literally it. The intro music that you heard briefly was I Saw You Last Night by Madison Avenue. Both are available on freemusicarchive.org.
You really can't keep that voice up.
I can't.
We record every week at Podcast Detroit. You can find them online at podcastdetroit.com, on Twitter at Podcast Detroit, and a big shout out to our beautiful engineer, Caitlin.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We want to give a big shout out to our families, Vicky and Sean.
We love you.
We do love you. All of our friends who've gamed with us over the years, and every last one of our listeners.